Well, it's good to be up here in front of you. And although Sam and I did not plan on both preaching on James 2 today, I am immensely grateful that you chose the first half of that book and chapter. Otherwise, this would be a very short message this evening. So we're going to look at verses 14 through 26. In fact, you can grab your Bible and go ahead and open up to James chapter 2, verses 14 through 26. I think what I'm going to do is just read these passages, get them out in front of us, and then we're going to talk about them a little bit. James chapter 2, starting in verse 14. What does it profit then, my brethren, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can faith save him? If a brother or sister is naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you says to them, "Depart in peace, be warmed and filled," but you do not give them the things which are needed for the body, what does it profit? Thus also, faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. But someone will say, "You have faith, and I have works. Show me your faith without your works, and I will show you my faith by my works." You believe that there is one God, you do well. Even the demons believe and tremble. But do you want to know, foolish man, that faith without works is dead? Was not Abraham, our father, justified by works when he offered Isaac, his son, on the altar? Do you see that faith was working together with his works? And by works, faith was made perfect. And the scripture was fulfilled, which says, Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him for righteousness. And he was called the friend of God. You see then that a man is justified by works and not by faith only. Likewise, was not Rahab the harlot also justified by works when she received the messengers sent them out another way? For as the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without works is dead. There are a lot of places in the Bible to go to talk about faith. Hebrews 11 comes to mind. It's the hall of faith. But often we come to James 2 in verses 14 through 26 to combat the faith-only doctrine, right? We come here, and after all, he says it 4 times in this passage. Faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead, verse 17. Verse 20, faith without works is dead. Verse 24, a man is justified by works and not by faith only. In verse 26, faith without works is dead. See, the faith-only doctrine says that all I must do to have salvation is believe that Jesus Christ is Lord. That argument doesn't really hold water in the context of James chapter 2. And so the battle lines are drawn. Faith-based doctrines lean heavily on Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 and 9. You can turn there, we'll read that in just a second. Ephesians 2, 8 and 9. And also in verses in Romans. And works-based doctrines lean heavily upon James. Let's read Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 and 9 real quick. I told you to turn there and then I didn't do it. Ephesians 2, verses 8 and 9 say, "For by grace you have been saved through" what? Through faith. "And that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God, not of works, lest anyone should boast." So as we look at these verses, how do we make sense of this? Seemingly, James here, maybe he's elevating works over faith. And then maybe Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 and 9 is elevating faith over works. So do we just pick the one we like and we go that way? Many people do. I want us to think about this, because this is where many of us land. We land in this place where faith plus works equals salvation. And that's only possible because of grace. Right? And that sounds good. That sounds like that makes sense. If you're still in Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 and 9, I want you to reread that again. Let's think about this. "For by grace you have been saved through faith, not of yourselves. It is the gift of God, not of works. Does this formula make sense the way it's written? I would submit to you that James is not necessarily talking about this formula. I don't think Ephesians 2 is talking about this formula either. I think the question is, does faith save us? And the answer is yes. But the question is, what kind of faith are we talking about? You see, James is talking about two different kinds of faith here. He's talking about a saving faith, and he's talking about a dead faith. And James is an intensely practical and very personal book, right? And you get 2 lessons from James today. So it's not the easiest thing to listen to, and it's not the easiest thing to talk about. But we need to hear this message. But James is very practical, and he's not going to leave us hanging on this question of what is a saving faith and what is a dead faith. He's going to give us illustrations. In fact, he's going to give us 4 of those illustrations in this passage. You heard these when we were reading them just a moment ago. I want you to notice a few things about these illustrations. The first thing I want you to realize is there are 2 examples of dead faith up here. 2 examples of dead faith. One is, I'm going to refer to it, I did not coin this phrase, but I like it, the armchair philanthropist. That's number 1 up there. Someone says, be warmed and filled, and doesn't do anything to actually change the situation of the needy. Number 2 is the believing demons. Okay, we're going to talk more about those guys. These are 2 examples of dead faith. 2 examples of genuine faith would be number 3 and number 4. Abraham, who offered Isaac, and Rahab, who welcomed Joshua's spies. There's another categorization we can do here, and that is the first and the last. You see, I put circles around these because these 2 relate to our circle of influence. These are the people that are around us. This is genuine faith as it relates to people around us. And then the other 2 would be genuine faith as it relates to our relationship with God. And this is the structure under which we're going to look at these 4 examples tonight. And we're going to stay really right here in James chapter 2. Let's talk about the armchair philanthropist. Found in verses 15 and 16 of chapter 2. It says, if a brother or sister is naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you says to them, depart in peace, be warmed and filled, but you do not give them the things which are needed for the body, what does it profit? There's a few things that we know about this person. They identify as a person of faith. Would you agree with that? This is someone who identifies as a person of faith. And this is also someone who sees the need of others, right? But for whatever reason, this person is unwilling to devote any time or talents or treasure to bettering that person's situation. And so the hungry and the needy come to this person, and the hungry and needy leave just as hungry and needy as when they came. What does that profit is the question. What does that profit? And we're asked to compare that to Rahab the harlot. And if you think about Rahab, her episode is recorded in Joshua chapter 2. And you can flip over there if you'd like to. In Joshua chapter 2, we look at Rahab's event. And Joshua chapter 2 describes a pretty dramatic event where Joshua is sending spies into the city of Jericho. And these spies are not very good at their job, I guess, because they're immediately found out. The king of Jericho and his men are pursuing these spies. And they are in Rahab's house. And so in verses 4 and 5, Rahab has a very critical decision to make. And it shouldn't have been that hard, frankly. I mean, the king of the city is coming to you and saying, where are these men? And she knows they're upstairs. She should have just turned them over, right? And reaped whatever rewards this king was willing to offer her. But she doesn't. She does a very interesting thing here, a very personally risky thing. She hides them. And she diverts the king's guards in a different direction to keep them safe. See, these men were helpless. They didn't have where to go. And she knew that. So, but why? Why would she do that? If you keep scanning down in chapter 2 of Joshua, you get to verses 10 and 11. In verses 10 and 11, Rahab says, look, I know the Lord dried up the Red Sea when you came out of Egypt. And you defeated the 2 Amorite kings. And she goes on to say in verse 11, the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. Is she a person who professes faith? Yeah. Is her faith genuine? I'd have to say it was. But is that because she has a great argument for that faith? Is that because she's telling people about her faith? I would say the reason we know her faith is genuine is because she not only recognized the need of these helpless people, but it moved her to action, right? Despite the risks for herself. And that faith, as we keep reading in Joshua 2, verse 13 says that faith saved her and her family. Not dissimilar to what James is talking about here in chapter 2. So here's a new wording for the thing that James said 4 times. Let's consider this and see if you agree with it. Faith is not what you believe. Faith is what you do about what you believe. You with me on that? See, James has been leading up to this point. In chapter 2, as Sam very adequately discussed this morning, leading up to this point, James in chapter 2 has been showing that favoritism and partiality is not a Christian attribute. That's not something we can do. Verse 4, he condemns the practice. I'm sorry, we're back in James 2 now, if I didn't tell you that. We're back in James 2. Verse 4 condemns the practice of becoming judges with evil thoughts. Right? And what does that even mean, becoming judges with evil thoughts? Well, it means we're putting ourselves in the judgment seat, right, where we don't belong to be. And 2, we are judging based on the appearance of a person, right? That's evil thoughts. In verse 5, James reminds us about God's nature. He says, God reaches out to the helpless, and we're glad he does, right? That's us. We are the helpless. James chapter 1, verses 14 through 18 reminds us, if we back up even further, that we sin because we are drawn away by our own desires and enticed. And it goes on further to say in verse 15 that sin brings forth death. Well, that's our current state. That's where we're at. But look in verse 18 of chapter 1. God, but God. So many good verses in the Bible start with but God. Proactively and with costly compassion made us, brought us forth into a new creation, into a new existence. He calls it first fruits in that passage. What were the first fruits? In the Old Testament, the first fruits were dedicated to God. They were holy and notably his. That's us. That's who we are. And as we move forward into chapter 2 again, we notice in verse 5, he says that those who love him will be heirs to the kingdom. You see that in chapter 2, verse 5? Those who love him will be heirs to the kingdom. So then it makes sense that in verse 8 of chapter 2, and there's a lot of verses here. I appreciate you staying with me. Chapter 2, verse 8, now talks about this royal law. This is the kingdom law. If we want to be in the kingdom with the king, then we got to follow the kingdom law, right? And this royal law says what? and we shall love our neighbor as ourself. Why? Because that's who God is. That's who he is. He is the one who reaches out to the humble and the needy and saves them. So partiality and favoritism don't have a place with Christians. That's not who God is, and that's not who we are. But also, reaching out in costly compassion to the helpless, that is who God is, and that is who we are. And just to underscore that point, he tells us in verse 13 of chapter 2, judgment is without mercy to the one who shows no mercy. Friends, I don't know about you, but I want to be I want to stand there on the last day and receive mercy. Faith isn't what we believe. It's what we do about what we believe. Among all the crying, I also have a little bit of a cough, so I'm going to be taking a throat lozenge occasionally here. Sorry about that. Let's look at the next two examples. Chapter 2, verses 18 through 20. We're asked to consider the believing demons. This is kind of a, I don't know, I haven't spent much time thinking about the spiritual state of demons. You know, you just kind of assume they're demons. So you may not have considered, if you're like me, the fact that they believe in God. Right? Look at this verse with me. But someone will say, you have faith and I have works. Show me your faith without your works, and I will show you my faith by my works. You believe that there is one God, you do well. Even the demons believe and tremble. So he starts off this conversation by posing this theoretical question, or this hypothetical question. He says, you have faith and I have works. Is that a thing? I mean, I'm thinking about the various spiritual gifts that we're blessed with. Is someone blessed with faith and someone else blessed with works? You probably have a conversation about that if you go to Romans 12 or 1 Corinthians 12 and look at those spiritual gifts, but that's not really the context what we're talking about here. The context that we're talking about is a genuine saving faith versus a dead faith. That's where James 2 is. And so he poses this logic test, this challenge, and this challenge says this: show me your faith without doing anything. Is that possible? I mean, it's not possible, right? You can talk about it. You maybe even be able to lead a Bible study on it. But if you're going to show that faith, well, you got to do something to show that faith, don't you? And that's the point that he's making. You can't show faith without living it. And that's why faith is not what you believe. It's what you do about what you believe. Verse 19. Now he gets into these demons. He says, you believe there is one God. You do well. Even the demons believe and tremble. So the demons have a kind of faith, right? I mean, they believe, really, they're in a unique position to believe in God. Would you agree with that? And that belief is probably completely unshakable. It's a known fact to the demons. But the point is this: if the demons can have that kind of belief and still be lost, can we? That's the point. See, this demon level kind of faith, this produces fear. And we're asked to consider that kind of faith that produces fear versus Abraham's kind of faith, which produces friendship with God. So I also didn't plan this, but Tyler spoke a lot about Abraham last week, and so did Matt. And so we learned a lot about Abraham last week, and one of those things was that he was not a perfect man by any stretch, But Tyler said this. He said, and I liked it, he was a man whose faith came to define him. Right? That's true. But what is the specific event that's being called into question here or being highlighted here in James chapter 2? It's this incident that Abraham offered Isaac. Who was Isaac? His son of promise. In his old age, the impossibility. Abraham should not have been able to have Isaac, right? And now he's here. And now he's growing up, and Abraham can see God's promise unfolding before him, and then Abraham gets this command to offer him up. And I used to look at this as an awesome sign of faith because Abraham is willing to undergo this misery that's coming from losing a child, from losing the future that he thought was coming from that child, and all of this stuff. But as you go back and look at Genesis chapter 22, and you can flip back over there with me or not, we're only going to look at one verse, but Genesis chapter 22 and verse 5. Look at what Abraham tells his servants. He says, the lad and I will go yonder. We're going to go over there, and we're going to worship. And then we're going to come back to you. What a simple verse. But in Abraham's mind, he's going to go over there and kill Isaac. And then he's going to burn his body. So is he just lying to his servants? What do you think? Flip back over to Hebrews with me. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 19. This is about Abraham. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 19. He says that Abraham concluded that God was able to raise him up even from the dead. That's faith. He's looking at this situation. Abraham's looking at this situation and saying, God has complete control over everything that's going to happen up here. Yeah, if God's going to bring him back from my knife wound and burning his body, he's going to reconstitute his flesh, just bring him back from the dead. Yeah, God can do that. And I'm still going to be the father of many nations, of many people. Is this kid's going to be raised from the dead, and he's going to be able to continue on with the family. He's not going to be hobbled. That is within the realm of possibility for Abraham, but he doesn't know the outcome, right? He doesn't see the rest of Genesis 22. In this moment, he doesn't know what's going to happen, but he knows one thing, and that is God is in control. That's the act of faith. And that faith allowed him to hold nothing back. Faith is not what you believe. It's what you do about what you believe. Some closing thoughts. As we look again at James chapter 2, verse 14, what does it profit, my brethren, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? The New King James Version says this next question is, can faith save him? But the New American Standard Version, I think that's what you were reading, Ben, said, can that faith save him? And I think that's really what we're talking about here. Can that kind of faith Save him. And of course, James is a very practical, very personal book, and so it's incumbent upon us to ask ourselves the question, can this kind of faith save me? So as we think about these examples that we saw here tonight, does my faith cause me to serve the needs of others like Rahab, despite the personal risk? Or am I more likely to wish someone well and stop short of action? Does my faith hold nothing back from God like Abraham? Or am I rationalizing what I'm not willing to do? Saving faith is not about what you believe. It's about what you do with what you believe. Maybe you're here tonight and you're thinking about this faith that you had. Maybe you've had it for a long time. Maybe you believe that there is a God up there, that Jesus is his son, that he came to die for you on the cross. Maybe you've stopped short of doing anything about that. Tonight is the night. Don't leave here without showing the evidence of that faith in your life. If we can help you in any way, please come forward as we stand and sing.